If Red Bull wants to keep Max Verstappen, then he'll like this. And even Helmut Marko is shifting his stance to be... kinda? It's been just over a week since Christian Horner was sidelined. Now a Red Bull director in name only, he's just crying in the corner somewhere. And the spotlight has turned to Laurent Mekies. Can he steady the ship and, more importantly, convince Max Verstappen to stay? Well, this tidbit might be music to the Dutchman's ears. And it's all to do with practice. I see, so it's Friday then. Mekies has been paying close attention to the trials and tribulations of the senior team whilst he was working at Racing Bulls, and he might have the opportunity to enact his supposition, because he, with an engineering mindset rather than medium muscle that Horner had, believes a smoother Friday could lead to better Saturdays, and reduce the need on Max to try and be a miracle worker on the Sunday, what with the risky low downforce setup they had to give him that pole around Silverstone. But anyway, here's the article's main tidbit, which I found really compelling for your consideration. Ahem. From what our editorial staff has learned, there will be changes to the methodology to optimize work on the track, but especially in terms of what happens back at the factory. Laurent believes the simulation track at Milton Keynes needs improvement. The aim is to maximize simulator skills and arrive in FP1 with a good base setup. Chasing the right setup for 3 free practice sessions puts a lot of pressure on the team, always looking for a miracle between Friday and Saturday. This is one of the first points identified by the Frenchman, one on which the team has been putting a lot of effort in recent days to improve. Now, of course, you might be a little bit skeptical since this is the findings of this site's editorial team and not words from Mekies himself. But on the surface, you've got to admit that these are the kind of findings that will be music to Max's ears, because to sort things out on the Friday, oh, that's simply lovely. It's a more technically driven plan of action, and it revolves around the biggest thing Verstappen has been clamoring about for months. Fix the damn car! And what will also help the team gauge where they're headed right now is that the next race is in Belgium. Not only a good barometer in general for where a car might be at, but it's also a home race of sorts for Max, a track which he adores, and usually pulls off some very strong performances in arguably debatable machinery. For FP1 and FP2, if this works out and they might be able to get some better reads in the simulator, then Max will be peachy keen come Saturday morning. Because yes, you've heard me say, and others say time and time again, that not only is Red Bull's wind tunnel antiquated, Cold War era, the new one couldn't come soon enough, and many people are arguing that Horner's dilly-dallying about it has meant that it's come far too late, but that also the virtual data and the real-world performance simply don't match up. A common problem last year, but it's something that is not quite shifting with Red Bull at the moment. If he can fix that, which is what Laurent is hoping to do in the time since he took up the role and then maybe before the Belgian Grand Prix, then it might lead to Max figuring things out much earlier than before, and it means that he doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting. That alone gives me a lot of confidence that Mekies might have what it takes to really get down to the bare bones of Max's plight right now. That it's got nothing to do with the political side of things, because that's a dead topic right now. That's been taken care of. What is the main fundamental issue is that Red Bull haven't really been taking seriously, almost being complacent at times, the technical maladies that they are facing right now, and Max's words not going heeded. And yeah, you might be thinking, well, why would Max stick around? Because both titles are a lost cause right now. That he's not going to be going after his championship. He's pretty much accepted he's not going to be defending his title unless a miracle happens and Norris and Piastri take points from each other. But the point is that the Red Bull group needs to, well, regroup. Many times before, he has said that it would be nice if he could remain at the same team for his entire career, which, if he does go throughout 2028, he would have done. He wouldn't have raced for any other team that didn't have a Red Bull logo on it. But I think the appointment of Laurent Mekies is a very, very sound one, because he's not a politically motivated kind of person. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, he was talking about Yuki Tsunoda's promotion and Liam Lawson's demotion, so he is politically minded. That is kind of valid, but I would say that his stance is more on the diplomatic side rather than trying to score political points and therefore drum up some superiority in power. I don't think he's got a power complex. Because you've only got to look at what happened at Racing Bulls, because at the beginning of 2024, before he really made his mark there, that team looked like just simply a billboard for Visa and Cash App, not really understanding what its identity was, and by the time he left that position, it's a place where you actually kind of root for them, that they actually treat their drivers well, a place of calm, cohesion, and reconciliation. Now, I know you're probably going to be mentioning, well, what about Daniel Ricciardo? They treated him horribly there. Yeah, that is something to mention. That is a valid point to bring up. But there is something about that whole situation where I feel like Mekies was powerless in order to resist Daniel Ricciardo getting the chop and then Liam Lawson coming in. The point is that these are the kind of changes I think Max wants in the hero now. He couldn't care less about media junkets, press conferences and the like. He wants to know that the new guy in charge hears him, gets him, and that perhaps the complacency we have witnessed in the last couple of seasons doesn't happen again. Now, I've already discussed the whole thing we found out via Horner himself, that Checo's warnings come Spain 2023 were unheeded because Max was absolutely going gangbusters, but then there were also mutterings that during 2024, when the RB20 was starting to lose its grip of total dominance, that perhaps that whole curb issue that we saw in Singapore 2023 was really rearing its ugly head, and Max was starting to flag it up around Imola because that was a main issue, and Norris was right on top of him, that there was no immediate action undertaken until several weeks later when it became very clear that McLaren were on it and Norris was starting to close in on the gap which ultimately did prove to be insurmountable, but was still probably something that Red Bull should have tried to rectify immediately when Max raised his hand and went, guys, come on, Max Verstappen was 60 points ahead in the championship. What's the rush? He'll be fine. McLaren won't be that dominant. Right? And as we have seen since then, since the Miami upgrade especially, McLaren are showing no signs of slowing down, even though they have a gargantuan gap to Ferrari and Mercedes behind them. They are still bringing parts in 2025, people. They are not going to stop. They want to pummel their rivals into the dirt and, as Zach Brown said after Silverstone, kick their ass! I'm pretty sure that Max is watching what's happening at McLaren right now and is wishing that Red Bull could be in a similar position. No more mad dashes or just bringing upgrades to every single race hoping that this little tweak here and this little tweak here will work, kind of like what Mercedes were doing with the W15 last year, which worked sometimes, but then sometimes didn't work. And speaking of upgrades, Red Bull are not slowing down despite both titles being out of the door right now. They have got parts, I think, for Spa and the Hungaroring, so maybe this might be a good opportunity for some of these implementations Mekies wants to bring in to be manifested with these particular parts as they've now been eventually given the green light to be put on the car in FP1. And reportedly, according to the F1 Analisi Technica thing, as well as various other articles, especially from Helmut Marko, these parts might have something to do with the floor and tyre management concerns. Now, these are very critical areas where we have heard Max Verstappen complain over the radio non-stop over 2025, particularly around Bahrain, something of which McLaren has been dominating the competition with. That the brakes would get hot for Max, that would seep into the tyres, they would overheat and lose performance, and then the cycle would repeat itself in a vicious manner over and over again. Now, at some races it did work, like in Imola, where the car and tyres would play ball, Max would go on to win that, but the lack of consistency is surely something that perhaps a better grasp of things on the computer beforehand would help sort Max out and give him a better understanding for brand new parts. Also, it would mean that the simulator team overnight between Friday and Saturday would have a much more calmer position and not be relied upon as much to come up with a cure-all fix, a quick fix, to maybe give Max some hope that he could at least get on the front two rows. They might be able to run a little bit more like clockwork and Max won't have to drag the car to places that it doesn't belong. That being said though, Verstappen will only be fully convinced that this plan is working if these new parts are actually showing meaningful increases or benefits in the stopwatch. If these parts fail to bring Red Bull closer again to Ferrari and Mercedes and maybe take McLaren down a peg or two, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we hear time and time again over Friday and Saturday Max getting on the radio and saying that, oh, the car is undrivable, or no, this is terrible, it's not working, and then GP just goes, understood. But on paper, I think the plans that Mekies might be coming up with are sound, that they speak to Max, that they might offer something that he's been wanting, a faster car, and the sense that the door is open on the technical side for him to have much more input, and in turn, Red Bull might hope that Max won't flee at the first sign of trouble, that he might just stick it out for a little bit longer, kind of like how Lewis stuck around with Mercedes for 3 seasons while they were trying to figure themselves out in the ground effect era. Ultimately, it didn't come to pass. So hopefully Red Bull's hoping that maybe 2026 might yield something better, because again, Max has said he would like to remain at Red Bull for his entire Formula One career, but that is not a guarantor for the team. That is not something that Pierre Vacher and Lazot can just go, oh, well, Max wants to stay here ideally, so what's the rush? It's fine. No, they got to take this seriously. All that assertion says is that it'll buy them maybe that little bit more time. Probably a little bit more time afforded to them than there would be if Christian was still in the job. And you know what? The departure of Horner might, I repeat, might make Dr. Marko a little bit more bearable. Yeah, you heard me right. You heard me mention in my initial winners and losers video about Horner's dismissal that Marko might stand to benefit from this, not only in terms of power gained and him ultimately winning the war between he and Horner, but maybe a sense of political tension no longer exists, that you might get a chill doctor in the future. Because more comments from Marko recently about Yuki Tsunoda, the second seat, have been more benevolent and understanding rather than critical. Although there have been a couple of critical comments, yeah, come on, Dr. Marko is still Dr. Marko. Old habits die hard and all that. It just makes me hope that Yuki won't be cast out at the first opportunity. Maybe Marko has begun to, or is now in a position to, flag issues with the car and echo the thoughts of his prodigal son Max without concern. That the car is to blame for the issue and not the guy in the second seat. But unfortunately, Marko's own words over the years and the revolving door policy for second drivers from said comments in the past have spread far and wide across the wider world. And the news outlets, to the point where this GP blog article that recently came out states that Tsunoda has already been given his marching orders, the only assertion that they know this will happen saying GP blog understands. There isn't really anything new to this article, and you might be saying, oh come off it, Law, you're a Yuki supporter. Look, if it ultimately doesn't work out for him, it doesn't work out for him. But I would rather hear it straight from Red Bull themselves saying their time with Yuki Tsunoda has come to an end, and we have not heard that yet. In fact, with Dr. Marko and what he's saying, he's actually saying, yes, I believe Yuki will get his act together soon and he'll be scoring once again. It's certainly a lot more forgiving and understanding than we've heard him in the last couple of years especially. So give the guy some credit maybe, he's turned a corner. And again, the Honda connection that this article mentions, it's not the same as it was just a few months ago. Honda no longer manages Yuki directly. He's got his own brand new management team, which is seemingly a lot more ballsy and punchy, and very much in the best interests of Yuki. Honda now are just sort of observing, maybe financially supporting, but they're reassessing their driver relationships in Japan more, so that means they might fare better overseas, which can only be a good thing for future Japanese talent. So yes, here are Marko's latest supportive words for your consideration. Ahem. And by the way, they came from the British Grand Prix this year. We had intensive discussions with Yuki, and he has also worked with sports psychologists. Unfortunately, he, like Max, had no chance in the race at Silverstone with this low downforce swing. But we're noticing an improvement in performance, and we're optimistic that this will soon translate into points. Now, to me, this shows that Yuki's struggles aren't entirely his fault. Marko's admitting that the car simply isn't good enough, and that the strategy calls they make aren't good enough either. Maybe we are seeing a more supportive, and dare I say kinder, version of this infamous advisor. It would at least show Yuki's efforts to troubleshoot the RB21 are being acknowledged to some extent from a senior figure, that he isn't banging his head against a wall anymore. Now, of course, you might be arguing with your own phone that Marko is only saying this for political and diplomatic reasons, to maybe curry favour amongst fans across the world, and to maybe just point the finger and say, yes, Christian was the bottleneck for everything that went wrong, all the troubles we've had the last few years, just blame that guy, I was not responsible. Helmut, you were. Your words were the undoing of Checo's reputation in the West. Come on. Own it. You might be right in that regard, but I think right now Tsunoda doesn't really care about that. What he does care about is to know that the guy, the special advisor, the most senior figure within the Red Bull racing team at the moment, has his back to some extent and is willing to say it publicly. To regain the confidence that might be needed to score more points, because the more confidence you get, the more points you're more likely to score and outdrive the car. Because seemingly the thing that he's lacked recently has been composure when he might get into Q3 and the first phase of Sundays. And with Marko not fixating on the mistakes and highlighting more often the progress that has been made, and maybe new parts coming could help, this could mean that Max has gotten through to him without the bottleneck of Horner knows best. This reduces maybe the fear of failure and lets a young driver lean on the limit without panicking or thinking that the team might hate him if he has a bad day in the office. Now, I'm not expecting this to immediately and dramatically see Yuki rise up the order and then get top 5 finishes every single weekend, or maybe get a cheeky podium. No, that is not realistic as of now. What I'm saying, these changes and tweaks and adjustments in management might manifest P12 finishes to become P9 finishes, P8 finishes. Also, it may mean that Max will have a slightly better opportunity to have a rear gunner in Q3 and maybe the race. That if McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes have a bad day and Yuki is able to capitalize on it and start ahead of them, that he might, Max, be able to get some sort of a gap and not have to work so hard to bring home the bacon on most weekends. You know, to have something that other teams might have, a second driver to help out the first driver who starts ahead of them, and therefore maximize the potential for points instead of Max being the only point scorer. Because Bahrain was a good example where Max was having a bad day in terms of strategy and pit stop maladies, meaning he didn't score as many points as he would like to. But Yuki wasn't having a terrible day despite his own fair share of mistakes and collisions. He did score a couple of points, almost got P8. It meant that Red Bull scored that little bit more in terms of pointage than they would have done had it just been Max. It also might mean Tsunoda feels trusted and therefore emboldened to not have to overdrive the car and overcorrect for any mistakes that he might make in the previous race. It's kind of like something I'm seeing with Kimi Antonelli, and he's even commented on it, that the last few races have been terrible for him. And had it not been for his Canada podium, I think the media would be dragging him over the coals even more than they are starting to right now. Some people are now saying that, oh, Kimi might have been brought up too early, or is he actually as good as people hyped him out to be, which is incredibly unfair for the guy. He's doing what he can right now with a really, really fragile W16. He's getting the bad share of the reliability with this car, people. And when it comes to who will be there next year, ideally, in my honest opinion, the team needs to keep both driver rosters the same for next year. Max and Yuki, Liam and Isaac. The team has burned through several drivers for the second seat at the senior team since Max stepped up in 2016, a decade ago. And each swap costs valuable time in the simulator, development focus, getting to know the driver and his style, and, of course, points and consistency. So giving Yuki real backing, it might stabilise the lineup for at least the rest of this season and maybe going on to the next, allowing Mekies to tie the car's setup philosophy for 2 consistent styles instead of 1. Carry the same 2 drivers into next year where Yuki can help develop the RB22 instead of him thinking he might know how the RB21 operates, and then when he gets in the RB21 he finds out like, no, I was completely wrong. Help? There might be more clemency afforded to him than either Lawson or Perez or Gasly or Albon. That list is a lot longer than it needs to be. But there's more Laurent can do to steady the ship and ensure that those who are loyal to their old boss remain with the team and not maybe reconsider their options and move to another team. Or, if the rumours are to be believed, head on over to Alpine in anticipation for supposedly Horner and Eccleston maybe considering buying out a stake of Alpine and entering into that operation that way, with Christian being the team principal. So I believe the first thing Laurent needs to do, and I do see a lot of people who walk into positions of powers do very much at the beginning of their tenure, is to hire their friends and punish their enemies. Basically keep things the way they are, ensure job security, and not start bringing in people from Racing Bulls to replace people at Red Bull Racing, or even worse, go to his older team Ferrari. So just don't replace people unnecessarily, just trust the process and trust the people already in their jobs. Because staff stability is really crucial at the moment, and something that Jos Verstappen, Max's dad, said was very important. Trying to ensure that the team doesn't explode, just remove its powder keg status. And also on the Max front, keep his trusted lieutenants. We're talking GP, we're talking Hannah Schmitz, we're talking other people who are not as publicly known within the Red Bull fold. That will matter more to Max that the remaining people around him that he trusts remain in their positions and are kept sweet, instead of the team having to rely on improving their public image, because that's not the main priority right now. The main priority for Red Bull is to fix the damn car! Because according to his interview with F1.com, he's already underlined that his priority is to give engineers what they need to perform at their best, and that will be a good start. Even though, according to some outlets, there was a degree of uncertainty and sadness around the Red Bull garage during their media day at Silverstone, where Mekies was wheeled out to the world for the first time in his new role. This is a wobbly time, but I don't think it's a lost cause. Now, whilst I have seen many people point out where Laurent Mekies started in Formula 1, and most notably spending a lot of time at Faenza with Minardi in particular, there is his initial stint at Arrows in 2001 as part of him being attached to Asiatech, who were the engine suppliers for Arrows that year. But who was driving for Arrows in 2001? One Jos Verstappen. He might have gotten to see Jos up close and how he operated and worked with those around him. He might have actually gotten to know the Dutchman in some shape or form and understand how the Verstappen camp works straight from the source before Max really started to get serious with karts. And it does make me wonder as to how much input Jos Verstappen had in securing the position for Laurent. Maybe he recalled him well from his time at Arrows and that he might have been a good egg when he was working in the engine department. It really depends, so I'll get the spanner out here because we don't know for sure if Jos even remembers Laurent from his time when he was working in his early 20s. But the point is, though, is that there is a connection to the past when Jos was an active Formula 1 driver. So that is something, if I ever got the opportunity to interview Laurent or Jos, I would ask about them. Do you remember your time together when you were working at Arrows? And then there's also a matter of something which Red Bull have really missed since Jonathan Wheatley departed them, some understanding in how the FIA works, because you got to remember that before Laurent Mekies went to Ferrari, Laurent worked for the FIA, rising up to the role of deputy race director, meaning that he did have some really good understanding in how Formula 1 went racing, and of course, the regulation, in that we may no longer see Red Bull shouting for the rooftops every single time that they have a quibble or they can't get over a technical thing and go, "Protest! Protest!" That perhaps Mekies will be picking his battles a little bit more specifically and carefully, and not go chasing something that ultimately they will lose. That if they do launch a protest, there is more substance to it than there might have been under Horner. Now, of course, Laurent may not be as versed as Jonathan was, because Wheatley's understanding of the rulebook for Formula 1 and his relationship with the stewards is second to none, but it's certainly a lot better than the grasp that Horner has had in recent times, where, you know, you would just give it a go with a protest and then see if it sticks, and if it doesn't, oh well, it's €2,000 down the toilet, but what's €2,000, am I right? And then in terms of technical directives and understanding of various rules and regulations, that is something I think Verstappen will appreciate, because he too has a good understanding of how the rule book works, because that's what he implements in his racing. He goes and does something on the track and says, no, I can do it, the rules say I can. Yeah, he does get that, and then Laurent might get that. There might be an appreciative understanding in that department too. Now, another thing which could speak to Max especially is the matter of press engagement, sponsor days, advertising. If Laurent can maybe promise Max something akin to him not having to do as many of those days and being able to just focus on making the car better and not having to be wheeled out to the public and go, "Hello everyone, I'm Max Verstappen and I approve this message." Yeah, if he doesn't have to do as much of that, then that'll be great for him. He's joked that he puts his brain activity on 1% to survive days like that, where he has to talk to suits and influencers and those who don't factor into the business of going racing. And I think that if he did go to Mercedes, he would have more of those days. They're known for heavy sponsor schedules, with George Russell very much subscribing to that notion. We've seen George Russell do plenty of commercials for Mercedes. You know, the whole things with Einhell and gardening products, and how George is very much demonstrating his love for gardening, and then that mouse backpack ad you saw all the time a few months ago saying, "This is the best backpack I've ever used." Kimi Antonelli's doing that as well for Marriott Bonvoy. I've seen those ads time and time again on Formula 1 videos. And I think that would be filling Max Verstappen with existential dread. So maybe a boss like Mekies, who understands and appreciates Max's disinclination for doing sponsor junkets, might appeal to him. That unknown at Mercedes about whether or not they might actually give him the time of day to be away from that sort of thing. There might be an uncertainty, his own form of doubt, Max, is about how much in terms of sponsor engagements he might have to commit to. There's no guarantee that Toto will be accommodating and will just allow him to do his own thing and skip them, because Mercedes have got to make their money back somehow. And when it comes to his extracurricular activities, Max, you can easily expect Mercedes to put a clamp down on that, especially with things that put Max in potential physical danger. I would expect Red Bull to continue what they're doing right now, that they'll just allow Max to go around the Nürburgring, do anything he wants in terms of racing cars. That's a freedom I think Max does appreciate and did appreciate under Horner, and I expect that to continue, or maybe intensify. He might be having even more control and freedom about what he does outside of Formula 1 weekends. In closing, the piece that I started at the top of the video with gives me assurance that Laurent will know what to do in keeping Max. simply by sharing more data with him, opening the door to development and taking what Max has to say seriously immediately when he flags it. It could easily simplify decision-making too on race weekends, that the team revolves around performance than boardroom drama or pleasing sponsors. Regaining Max's trust and showing transparency, it might be more appealing than having to start anew at Mercedes where the relationship there is brand new. Can Max really be bothered with that for just 3 more seasons, supposedly? Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, I think Toto has a plan that doesn't just revolve around Max. If he had his way, Wolf, he could have nearly a quarter of next year's grid under his influence, or be kind of associated with him. To find out what I mean by that, and how next year we might see the return of 2 of his closest driver allies, watch this video next, straight after this one.